So, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, Building Resilience Through Material Reuse. My name is Lucy Rees, a Sustainability Advisor for the UK Green Building Council. And we're bringing you this event today as part of World Green Building Week and in collaboration with ReLondon, who we are partnered with on the EU Horizon 2020 funded project Circuit. So today we're going to be hearing from the fantastic speakers that you can see here about how and why we can make material reuse more common practice across the built environment. And with no further ado, I'm going to hand you straight over to our chair for today, who is Miles Watkins, Director of Stuff for Life, to kick things off.
So thanks very much, Lucy, and hello, everybody. I can't begin to tell you the irony of sitting here chairing this session in a business park in Nottingham, which is the home of the Institute of Quarrying, as I look out the window to the building opposite and watch all the carpet tiles, all the furniture and everything else that's within that building disappear into a skip. You literally could not make it up as it is happening live as we speak, which is kind of sad, because what we need to do here is to turn material reuse, to turn circularity into something which is normal and not something which is special or a case study. In order to drive forward sustainability and really look after people and the planet is something that is fairly essential. But I think there is, some outstanding hope here. I was chatting to Peter Kelly from ISG this morning, and we were both marveling at the generations following us through into the built environment, whereby there is such now a strong desire to make things better. I think there really is a raging amount of hope to really mainstream these core elements of resilience and circularity. So just a bit of an intro to me, because I don't want to go on too long, because the stars of the show are following me. So I've worked in materials pretty much my whole professional career. I was one of the founding members of Green Building Council many years ago, and I worked for Agri Industries. I was there 17 years. I then worked at BRE, and since then I've been independent, working with all kinds of startups, particularly around modern methods and indeed reuse and circularity. I am a monumental advocate of getting the whole of the built environment together to discuss these important issues, and too often we find that there's great segregation between the different sectors and subsector, which makes it very difficult to move topics forward. And I think around circularity, it's a prime example. There's a very large gap between the supplying community, people that make commodities and products going into construction, and those end up operating the built environment. So as part of a broader amount of work that I'm doing with UKGBC on this, I'm also chairing a subgroup looking specifically at what the materials companies and the supplying companies are doing in this particular space. So if you're keen to get involved in that, please let me know. Something else that I'm doing, which is similar but adjacent, is looking at plastics and the circular economy. And as I'm sure we'll hear from the speakers that are following me in a minute, it's really quite difficult in some cases to enable circularity. So I'm looking at fluorescent jackets and fluorescent vests and all the sort of stuff that's used in construction, and how I can extract the elements of plastic and then put it into new plastic and new polyester to make those garments again. And pretty much 3/5 of the wheel that you can see on the screen here are entirely missing. So we're quite good at supplying stuff, and we're quite good at using it, and absolutely appalling at collecting it back. There is almost no reprocessing infrastructure whatsoever. And then beyond that, there's almost no, apart from artisanal domestic manufacturer of polyester. So this is like a small sort of slice of circularity that I'm involved in. And, it's a really genuinely quite hard slog, but a necessary one. And I'm absolutely convinced that there are parallels of all different materials that are relevant to the built environment. But it is an area where people like myself and a whole lot of others are starting to create business in little niches to try and move this stuff forward. And interestingly, also, you're finding, interesting collaborations that are coming together. So I also work with a business that's a waste brokerage. They've started a piece of work a little while ago called Project Divert, which is really trying to deal with what I'm looking at out the window, and probably more in the short term than the long term. So what comes out of buildings and what can be repurposed through the third sector. So they've got an app whereby you know, it's a bit like, for those of you who are old enough, it's a bit like Saturday swap shop, really, between the built environment and charities. So you've often got charities looking for elements to put into their, you know, youth clubs and headquarters and centres and various other bits and pieces. So what can be exchanged between one sector and the other? You know, some people look at this and go, well, you know, Miles, that's a little bit of downcycling. But like I said, the infrastructure that's in place to promote circularity is a little bit scant. So this is an effort in that direction. They've also got a further piece of work they're working on at Encore, which is around material exchange. So this is more around sort of over-ordered materials rather than secondhand materials, but it's really finding a home for all those bits and pieces that otherwise might be going either into the sky because they've been incinerated or into a hole in the ground, which of course is terribly sad. And that's what we face every day. And we need to always remember that when you're dealing with Green Building Council and the community that are on the phone, on the call here, we are dealing with the forward-thinking types. Behind us is 95% of all the things that happen in the world, and that's where the real massive impacts are. So the more we can do to show the way, and the more we can take the broad community of construction and owning and operating the built environment with us, the better that will be. So this is what we're going to do today. That was me doing scene setting and opening remarks, and we've got 4 speakers that are following me that are going to share their screens one after the other, and I will introduce them as they come through. We're going to have a discussion in the back end of the session, somewhere in around 22 or quarter to 3. And then we'll have a closing poll at the end. If you want to ask questions, please put them into the Q&A segment that you'll see in the menu bar, wherever it is in your screen. On mine, it's at the top. And I'll do my best to keep an eye on that to ask the questions of the speakers on your behalf. So without further ado, then, I'll hand over to Dr. Purva Tavri, who's from Circuit. And as I'm talking, she will swap the screen over to her own. I can stop that, actually. So Circuit is a collaborative project. It runs for 4 years, from 2019 to 2023. There's 31 partners involved, and it's looking at the built environment across a range of physical places. So Copenhagen, Hamburg, Helsinki, and London. It's part of the Horizon 2020 programme. And it's really looking at regenerative cities and really looking at this whole piece around circularity and resilience. And what Purva is going to talk to us about is the London focus piece, where they've been investigating across the full supply chain in terms of high-value recycling and reuse and all that kind of stuff. So involving all of those subsegments that I was referring to earlier. So, Purva, off you go.
Thank you, Miles, for the introduction, and good afternoon, everyone. I'm Dr. Purva Tavri from ReLondon, and as Miles indicated, we at ReLondon, as part of the Circuit project, carried out this investigation for 6 months period of time, where we engaged with more than 50 individuals throughout the supply chain to understand reuse and high-value recycling in London. So today, I'm going to present to you the research insights, where I will be providing and focusing on current trends and practices, the benefits and barriers that were indicated by the participants, and the recommendations that they provided. So to start with, reuse. It has been identified that there are no set targets for reuse. And in addition to that, there are no formal records. No formal ways in which reuse is being recorded at the moment. The informal ways in which reuse is carried out is predominantly for the materials such as iron and steel, hardcore materials, timber, and furniture. With regards to recycling, almost 60% of the waste is disposed of as mixed construction and demolition waste. The recycling rates range between 55 to 98%. And there are some materials with almost 100% recyclability, and they are predominantly gypsum or plasterboard, mixed metals, timber, and glass, which can be recycled, but if segregated properly. However, segregation again is not a normal practice. Among demolition contractors, we found out that there is an uncertainty in understanding reuse. In particular, some of the demolition contractors consider reprocessing or downcycling as reuse. One of the classic examples is crushing the concrete and transforming that or downcycling that into groundworks. In addition to that, we also found out that careful disassembly or dismantling is not a normal practice. So we asked the demolition contractors that if deconstruction plan becomes a normal practice or becomes an integral part of the process, then what are the potential materials that they think can be carefully dismantled? And this is what they said. So among several other materials, these are the top rated materials that demolition contractors said have the potential for careful dismantling. These are raised floor tiles, timber or doors, metals, plasterboards or similar partitions, carpet, bricks or stonework, glass and similar partitions. It will be interesting to hear from our manufacturers in the panel about what do they think about these materials. Next stage in the research, we asked our participants about what do they think about the benefits? What are the benefits of reuse and recycling? And this is what we found out. So the top 3 rated benefits are cost benefit, selling point to the clients as a benefit, and environmental benefit. So to get into the detail of this, we wanted to understand how do they consider this as benefits. So we asked them about that, and it was quite interesting to find that these all benefits are very much interrelated to each other. In circles, here are some of the quotations from our participants, which reflects this. So for example, better carbon credentials helps improve networking to clients. Creating a better environment enables exceeding client targets. These are the environmental benefits which are leading to increased selling point. Then better data and outcomes win more work, selling point. Better segregation leads to economic benefit, cost benefit. So if the materials are properly segregated and better data and outcomes are being collected and recorded, then it can certainly lead to both cost benefit and selling point as a benefit. We all know that the construction industry is driven by profit, and knowing that benefits of reuse and recycling, cost benefit is one of the highest recorded benefit of reuse and recycling, then what are the challenges out there? What are the barriers that industry has which prevent them to facilitate reuse and high value recycling? This is what we found from our research. So these are the barriers that were indicated by our participants to reuse and recycling. Lack of legislation and policy for reuse or high value recycling of building materials, cost and high fees of both reuse and recycling, perception or lack of awareness and clarity, time, lack of materials warranty, insurance or certification, or contamination, health and safety, cosmetics issues related to materials, then storage and space and related logistics, lack of demand, lack of supply, and lack of incentives were the barriers indicated. Here, it is interesting to see that on the one hand, participants indicated cost as the top benefit for reuse and recycling. However, based on current market style and the way market is working, cost and high fees of reuse and recycling is one of the major barriers. So here we all need to think about it, how to get rid of that and how to mitigate that. So along with this, we started associating benefits and barriers, and then we asked the participants about the recommendations, particularly the recommendations that they have for designers and developers, for government and policymakers, and for other stakeholders. So now I'm going to present the recommendations, which is very much relevant to our topic today, and which are also relevant to the panelists we have today. And at the end of the session, I would really like to hear from our panel. What do they think about these recommendations as manufacturers? So one of the recommendation is about materials. It is particularly for designers to think about using or considering those materials in the design process that can easily be dismantled and also enable emissions reduction. And this came out as most of the materials in current contemporary buildings are very difficult to reuse or recycle. Another recommendation is around materials testing and insurance guarantee. So at the moment, it has been identified that there is a lack of information on testing or insurance and even lack of facilities. This I would particularly like to hear from our manufacturers today, that is it something that they can provide or are they already providing? And if so, can it become part of their reverse logistics to enhance the reuse? Then data recording, as I indicated earlier, that there is no formal way of recording reuse at the moment. And the information that we gathered from our stakeholders gives a high inconsistency in the way the recycling data is recorded. So this is something we all need to think about. Tools and practices. So this is something interesting that participants mentioned several tools, existing tools such as material passporting, material exchange portals, and many other tools that are already out there that can facilitate reuse. So what we as industry need to do is start using those tools and see what are the outcomes. And finally, capacity building. The industry needs to collaborate, share, and learn to develop skills and capacity so that we all can work towards circularity. Before I wrap up, I would like all the audience to please visit Circuit website. And if you have not, please register yourself so that you can receive the updates. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Purva. That was very interesting indeed. There's been a few questions popping up in the chat, which we'll address afterwards. But just before we move on to the next speaker, I will take the chair's prerogative and ask you something. I mean, clearly this whole lack of legislation piece is sort of burning a hole in people's minds, which in some respects is a bit sad, isn't it? Because you'd hope there were some other motivations. However, one of the participants has actually asked exactly this question or suggested it, and Howard Button is suggesting, well, why don't we introduce an end-of-life building directive? So Purva, do you think an end-of-life building directive would move us in the right direction?
I mean, this is interesting because this has been one of the recommendations from our participants as well. So as part of recommendation around mandates and legislative policies, the participants mentioned about developing end of policy around deconstruction. So end of policy is certainly something which has been identified because we have end of policy for waste electrical and electronic and other type of waste, then why not for the building waste? So this is something that I think is something for the industry to think about, and perhaps I'm sure our panelists, manufacturers here can shed more light on it.
No, absolutely. And I think, like I said, in some respects, it's quite disappointing that people want to wait for the stick to come along. And industry has this love-hate relationship with legislation where they wait for it to come along to move forward. But when it turns out, they don't like it very much. So we'll have to see how that pans out. Excellent. So we'll come back to the panel chat. So thank you very much for that. And you can retire into a camera off and mute. And we're going to go to Barry next, who is going to share his bits as I introduce him. Barry's from Tata Steel Europe. Excuse me, it won't be lost on you that Tata is obviously an enormous organisation And certainly from a steel perspective, it's in 26 countries, one of the biggest producers in Europe, making really big inroads into reducing its carbon intensity, down 15% since 1990. They want to get it down 40% from 1990 by 2030 and be zero carbon steel by 2050. Easy to say in 20 seconds. And if you've had any experience of making stuff, you'll know that is monumentally difficult, but well done for publicly declaring that. So Barry's going to talk about a bunch of stuff. So he's going to talk about the whole life perspective, which is pretty critically important because clearly a large range of building materials are in use for very long periods of time. So that whole life piece is really important. It's going to talk about transparency, data, reuse protocols, and the importance of collaboration, which is one of my favorite things. So good to see you, Barry. I will step back. You carry on, sir.
Thank you very much. Just to warn you, Miles, I've been kicked out twice in the last 5 minutes, so let's keep our fingers crossed here. So Miles has already introduced what I'm going to talk about. I've got 5 minutes, so I'll crack straight on. So I'm going to start the presentation by stressing the importance of needing to take a whole life perspective in our resource decisions. And if we define sustainable development as the ability of to meet the needs of the present without compromising the ability for future generation to meet their needs, then clearly we need to consider the implications of our resource decisions, both now and in the future. And there are many examples out there of how we've delivered as a society unintended consequences by only considering the present day and not assessing future potential impacts. And this slide isn't about beating up the plastics industry either. I know there's a lot of great work with that sector going on to solve the challenge of waste, but it was just a point to be made, particularly with the I think the 1980s advert on the side of new plastic cups, but certainly not there's room for all materials, and I'm certainly not beating up the plastics industry here. But so from a manufacturer's perspective, we're saying whole life's important, then we need to find ways to describe whole life impact. And of course, there are established ways of doing that, and environmental product declarations are one of the ways we do that. At Tata Steel, we've taken the unusual step of setting ourselves up as an operator of an ISO EPD program. And in the last 5 years, we've produced something like 60 externally verified EPDs of our product range. But there are health warnings related to EPDs, and that relates to certainly when we're trying to compare EPDs across product ranges and sometimes even within products themselves. And this can be challenging due to the differences in reporting of individual EPDs. So what we see on screen here is an extract of an environmental product declaration showing the 17 modules of the EPD, from raw materials on the left to reuse, recovery and recycling, the point here, on the right. And it's important to note that not all manufacturers report all stages or the same stages of EPD. So it's really important to understand that you're comparing apples with apples. And I guess if we consider and we look at reuse, recycling and recovery, if we're not reporting that, then we're treating a material potentially the same way that a material that might go to landfill is a material that might be perfectly reusable. So we need to take care. ISO standards are trying to make a more harmonized approach on this by making more of the modules compulsory, and that of course is helpful. So in terms of numbers of examples of reuse, this is an example of preparing for reuse. So this is a project that Tata Steel were involved in with the Delta Development Group, building a distribution centre at Schiphol Airport. It's preparing for future reuse by utilising demountable solutions, popular sizes of columns and beams to drive circular economic enabling. Also, in terms of the data provision, really important, so the building of material passports containing all the steel specifications for future reference. I think the key question here is, how do we turn this from a great example of a catwalk project into business as usual at an industrial scale? Well, I think knowledge exchange and promoting through supply chain engagement, really pleased that Miles talked about on the get-go segregation and gaps in that, and I think we can all do more to achieve that. And we've got an example here of a structural steel reuse protocol. This was created by the Steel Construction Institute a couple of years ago, exactly to do that, to try and engage with the supply chain. And it provides suggestions on how to overcome some of the issues with steel product reuse, such as establishing material characteristics and reuse CE marking, for example. But in terms of kind of wider issues, and it was really interesting seeing Purva's data, and I'm looking forward to the discussion later on, but the kind of barriers to reuse and potential enablers is very similar to what we're experiencing in our work on reuse projects, and also in when we look at how we drive our product development for circular economic enablers. Now, Tata still can't deliver a circular economy itself, but it can deliver the products that give the greatest chance of circular economic use later on. And clearly standardization is an important part of that. Purva's already mentioned that. And I guess some of the work we're doing across platform design for manufacturing, assembly and construction platforms start to drive us to look at more a standardized product approach, which is helpful. And I was talking recently to an actual seller of steel reuse materials, and he was saying to me just last week, one of the biggest issues is just understanding the grade of the material without going through a world of pain. So clearly for future reuse, we need to drive digital to physical traceability from the manufacturer onwards. And this is work that Tata Steel are looking at today, looking at durable product marking, looking at provision of data, cloud-based systems that are multi-decade available. And that's all part of the challenge to solve that problem that are experienced on the ground today. A further substantial issue is that supply chains simply aren't set up for reuse, from reclamation to final fabrication, and certainly not at scale. So clearly new business models need to be developed, which allow us to define the risk and the reward of reuse, and also the provision of a supply and demand balance. And I know it's risk and reward and supply and demand balance were some of the key features of Purva's research. I guess that brings us finally to economics, which Purva mentioned also as a key enabler and a key barrier at the same time. I think probably what that means is where it is economic, it's a really good thing to do, but where it's not economic, it's a barrier. And from a manufacturer's perspective, what we need to do is in manufacturing is to I think we have a really important role here on provenance, data provision, and other areas that we've talked about here already to deliver potential future circular economic benefits, or at least give the materials the biggest chance to achieve that. But if we consider procurement and end of life as two separate evaluation processes, then from a manufacturer perspective, what we're going to fail to do is generate the momentum in the manufacturing community that's required, and certainly in the investment to deliver those circular economic enablers around marking, around data. That's something that we're looking at consistently now. And I think that's a key lesson that we need to learn today in order to drive through supply chain engagement on this. And that concludes my 5 minutes, I think, Miles.
That's fantastic, and you'll be pleased to know that we heard all of it, and you didn't drop out, and you weren't talking to nobody. So that's yeah, phew, well done, high five. So thank you very much for that. You've got a literally an oil tanker of a beast to deal with there with your organisation and the mass that goes through it. I was just wondering, because EPDs are, as you just pointed out, a bit hazardous and a bit complicated, and you, like me, have been doing this quite a long time, and we both look at them and go, what's the story here? Is it simply to specify a level of recycled content in a steel product than to concern yourself with all the other parameters, just to move the game forward?
Yeah, sure. It's actually not. It's counterintuitive, but I guess one of the big advantages, and I was going to show a slide of some guys outside a colleague of mine's house nicking the metals from the skip where he was redoing his kitchen. Value in the materials is the key enabler to circular economy. If there's no value in the materials, they could end up in landfill. If the materials are worth 300 quid a ton, which steel scrap is today, give or take, then you've got the built-in infrastructure, you've got the value in the good. So what you can do is recycled content in steel supply chains is not a good driver or a good metric. In fact, it could drive dysfunctional behavior, so that you're importing cheap scrap from elsewhere in order to deliver a target, and you're hiding those unintended consequences, for example, of, I don't know, importing scrap or whatever it might be. But adding or putting some sort of metric on recycled content for your steel project won't encourage recycling. It's pretty much done because the material's worth 300 and something quid a ton already.
No, that's really interesting. So sometimes the simple isn't very helpful, I suppose, is the short story there, right?
Yeah.
Brilliant, thanks, Barry. We'll crack on then to our next contributor, Tim, who's going to pinch the screen, hopefully, while I'm talking. So Tim is from Whitecroft Lighting. So this is a much more complex offering, as you can possibly imagine. So clearly a lighting organisation based in Manchester. That's good. Someone not based in London. Big cheer for that. And what's really important here is in 2020 they launched Whitecroft Vitality around the principles of circular economy. And again, I think, you know, for everyone on the call here, that's to be respected. That is a monumental leap from the normal to the unusual. So good on you. Tim's going to talk about design considerations, which you heard about earlier. So that's really good. He's going to talk about third-party verification of the products and the certification piece, which again has been touched on earlier. And indeed, there's questions in the Q&A around, if you like, the performance of the guarantees around products that have got previously used materials and that kind of stuff. Data. Our friend Data, again, is appearing in every one so far. And then something you call, which I really love, the power of the inner circle, which I'm really keen to hear about. So, Tim, sir, over to you.
Thank you very much, and good afternoon, everybody. It's great to talk to you today briefly. So I guess if you look at the lighting industry as a whole, you know, in the last 10 years or so, we've made fantastic improvements around operational performance through LED technology and controls. And of course, we should be proud of what we've done there. But perhaps one of the things that maybe we've lost in what we've done today is the consideration for reuse. Now, with old fluorescent technology, we could replace the light source, and we could keep that product in use again and again and again. And I guess where our change and mindset perhaps moved on from just looking at operational performance came when we worked on a project with a customer who wanted to deliver it in a circular way and wanted to reuse the existing lighting they already had and upgrade it from fluorescent technology to LED, and it really started to redefine how we deliver products and the wider market address that we have. And as Mars mentioned, we launched Whitecroft Vitality last year, taking those key principles of the circular economy, designing out waste, pollution, the recirculation of products and materials, and the regeneration of what we already have. And I guess reframed how we design products and how we present products to the market. And just sort of a few of the ideas that we really started to challenge and think about was first of all, think about how we source our materials and thinking responsibly about that. So we are a UK manufacturer, so could we work with UK supply chains to deliver some of our products and components to reliability around supply, demand, volatility, and just, you know, delivering a better social value in what we do. We then start thinking about material selection, so how much material we use, can we drive out material usage, can we think about the materials we use, and we then start to understand what it is we do and what goes into our products rather than just simply saying it's plastic, electronics. What does that mean, and what's the longer term impact of what that can do? And then if you start thinking about through-life utility, you're starting to highlight the benefits around control integration, so using smart controls and individual devices within luminaires to start data and information and an understanding of how our products are performing in operation and being able to maintain, prolong, and ensure the longevity of performance of products, rather than have to go and replace or not know what to do with it from a maintenance point of view. And finally, probably one of the biggest things we did is really think again about modularity of design, enabling the replacement of components in a simple, sort of easy non-tooled access way, enabling that regenerative recovery and keeping those products in use for as long as possible, and also harnessing potential future improvements in energy efficiency or lighting controls as the space might adapt and change through life. So really just challenging how we did that. And one thing that really came through that sort of process and through speaking to customers was the importance of transparency of that data and the verification of what we did. So rather than us just say our product is circular or has this, now where's the evidence, where's the proof? And just a few of the things we really started to look at was cradle certification that looks at 5 different aspects of the product. So it looks at material health, material reutilization, water stewardship, social fairness, and also the use of renewable energy in production. So really giving us a very transparent process of the products, identifying what goes into those products, but also enable our clients and the people to understand and ourselves understand how we can improve and do things better. We've also started looking at EPDs and getting our first third-party certified EPD. We're also trying to challenge it around how do we adopt or how do we bring in the circular principles and values into what is a linear create a great process. How do we try and adopt and understand the benefits of circularity in that? The next thing we looked at was material passports. So again, giving that transparency of data for end of life so somebody knows what to do with that product. By scanning QR codes, you can identify what it is you have. And through the reconditioning, I'll talk about in a second, but also getting vehicle type marking and certification. So again, that client has that reassurance and understanding that we followed a process and followed a system that assures the quality of the products. But also, as Mark mentioned, this term "power of the inner circle," which comes from the Ellen MacArthur Foundation. As I mentioned right at the beginning, where we started this journey for us was reusing what you already have. Rather than taking out and remanufacturing it, why not use the assets that you already have within your space and regenerate that space with the products that you have? That is one of the key principles of circular economy, is not reusing something old, but actually reusing what you've already got and maintaining it and prolong it for as long as possible. But of course, that's easier said than done. We've got to think about the suitability of the materials, of the building regulation changes, of wiring, of immersive lighting, just light quality in general, the testing and assurance complexity, that can all give benefits and risks around the regeneration of what we already have. We clearly need to think about future-proofing what we do. And if you're going to think about the reuse in the future or the regeneration in the future, we need to make sure we don't just do this once and maybe change T5 to LED. We enable it to happen again and again and again. And finally, I think it's touched on already a couple of times, this cultural shift may have to happen. Looking at the opportunity or potential for innovation that reuse and the maintenance of prolonging what we have can bring into design. Innovation for us is often seen about the new best luminaire. Is there some innovation around the regeneration of what we already have today, and does that bring that change? But that will mean people need to be willing to accept secondhand. It will take a better understanding of cost, the assumption that it's always going to cost cheaper to put new in than replace components, from a contractor's point of view, and just help people understand and identify that through information, education, and understanding. So thanks for your time, and pass you back to you, Miles.
Thanks so much, Tim. Brave and interesting. How's this going down in the market? Because obviously you're brawling it out on a daily basis with a whole load of lighting suppliers from all over the world. So what's the interest? What's the uptake like? Yeah,
really, just we presented this. We have a CPD that we do. We've probably talked about it over 100 times now to different various customers. And yeah, some really interesting feedback. Some people love it, want to understand they adopt it. Some people are concerned if it costs a penny more. We're not interested. But I think generally on the whole, it's very positive. People want to see how they can do things differently, how they can tackle, not just the operational performance, but also the embodied carbon within products, and how they can look to design innovation and consider the approach to design, in a different way.
No, and it's interesting that clearly there are monumental challenges around the fact that in many areas, the cost of new virgin things doesn't necessarily take into account the environmental and social damage costs, and are indeed cheap. And that provides for a monumental economic battle for high levels of circularity, as talked about by a bunch of the speakers. So well done for being brave and moving forward on that basis. So we are chewing through the time, but I want to move on now to John from Interface, who will now start to share his content. I am a monumental fan of Interface because I've been doing this sort of stuff for 27 years, and that is exactly how long Interface have been looking at regenerative business and carpets. And if you've been into sustainability for a decent period in the built environment, you'll recognize that. And really a lot of that was off the founder, which is, so that's quite different to having a sustainability person trying to kill themselves to get their business to go in the right direction. So really quite an amazing story. And now a business that's looking to be carbon negative by 2040, which of course is really impressive, and clearly reuse is a significant part of that. John's going to talk about designing for this, so designing products that start with high levels of reused content and bio-based content to become less reliant on virgin materials, and particularly virgin oil, which is a big deal in the plastics and carpet space, and also look at the environmental and social benefits of working with social enterprises and organizations of that nature. So I will let you carry on, John. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you, Miles, and afternoon to everybody, and hopefully you can hear me nice and clearly. To start off with a few words from our late founder, Ray Anson. We do have a choice as manufacturers, as engineers, as architects, as designers, as consumers. During our time on this planet, we can either help it or we can hurt it. When I think about material reuse and circularity, we need to do a better job when it comes to making the right choices as manufacturers, making it easier for our stakeholders and customers to make more circular choices. We've got a lot of work to do. At Endoflife, as Miles was saying, our mission is called Climate Take Back. We want to run our business in a way that helps to reverse the impact of global warming. Long term, by 2040, we seek to be a carbon negative enterprise. And then as of last week, we agreed and announced our science-based targets to see how we're going to tackle our scopes 1, 2, and 3. But in terms of material reuse and circularity, my focus today is on the very exciting world of carpet tiles, which is our bread and butter. Now, for us, circularity is a design challenge. You need to be thinking about it both in relation to what you produce at the outset and what you do at end of life. And I think in saying that, I'm echoing the sentiments of all the speakers that have gone before me. Now, when it comes to a floor tile, you have the soft part, which you walk on, and the hard part of the backing, which gives it its stability. When it comes to the soft part and the yarn, we're already able to use yarns that are 100% from recycled sources, including the use of fishing nets and waste from the automotive industry. But our recent focus has been thinking, well, what could we do with our backing? And the key point here is that sometimes when you're thinking about how do you make your product more circular, you have to change some significant parts of your product, which is sometimes quite daunting. For us, recently, it's been changing our backing. So we've moved from using more of a bitumen-based backing that we call Graflex to one that is using a biocomposite that contains large amounts of recycled material and bio-based materials. Our aim in using large amounts of recycled and bio-based materials is to turn off the tap to virgin oil and make sure that we can reuse it in the future. Now, all of looking across our whole portfolio of products, any carpet tile that's bought within our European region will have an average of 88% total recycled and bio-based content. We're happy that that's the right circular choice because it turns off that tap. Again, the impact of that was a 1/3 reduction in the carbon footprint of our whole product in relation to embodied carbon categories A1 to A3 in terms of what a manufacturer can look after. We also wanted to make sure that there was no loss of function. Carpet tile is a very durable thing. We want it to have a long life, 10, 15 years with warranty for 15 years. So there was no trade-offs in terms of creating a new backing that wouldn't give us that performance. But we also wanted to make sure that that stability was there for its reuse, but also it could be recycled at the end of life too, and it could be turned back into new products for ourselves. One of the challenges we had with our bitumen-backed Graflex tiles was that although it was technically possible to recycle, it was hard to do. It was too slow, it was too cumbersome. We tried it, it didn't work. We were willing to admit that and go for a better path. So now we focus in terms of how we talk with our customers around really making sure that reuse and recycling are key discussions. And as Miles was saying, we get the opportunity to work with some great social enterprises. This is Greenstream in Porth in South Wales. I think one thing a manufacturer needs to think about is how it can support the secondary and tertiary use market. With Greenstream, they'll look at our tiles, sift through them, grade them. Some will go to SMEs, some will go into kind of youth clubs, but also some will go to social housing. Often you just get a bare shell now. And with those that won't be used for offices, they have a monthly or every couple of months giveaway day so people can kind of pick their own rugs for social housing. We're actually working with a couple of social housing authorities too. It's a great opportunity there to state the discussion, but to think about how do we support as manufacturers the social enterprise industry and the circular industry. For us, it's just getting that balance. You need to think about circularity in your life cycle of your carpet tile, but then you also need to think about what happens at end of life. And if you make a change and you have a new innovation, you have to also remember that you've got your legacy products to think about too. You can't just be focused on what the latest has been. So we, for our approach, have to think about our new sequence bio-backed products, but we also have to think about what products we put out in our older bitumen Graflex backing, make sure there's reuse options there and potential other repurposing and recycling options there. So it's important for us that you take full responsibility in relation to that. And then just to finish, circularity is a wonderful way to have a discussion with both your customers and your supply chain. This is an example, one of the things we take to our customers. We kind of say, if you want some principles to design for climate and circularity in mind, think about starting with the most most responsible and sustainable materials. And going back to kind of earlier points, that will really depend on what that material is. Make sure you're looking at those products having the lowest embodied carbon footprint. If they can, look to see how close they are to getting to carbon neutrality. And then finally, always make sure that a product, if suitable, can be reused and recycled. So that was a whistle-stop tour, just to show you what's happening and our views from the flooring trade, and really looking forward to our discussion.
Thanks very much, John. Obviously, you guys are driving that forward and forward and forward some more, so you haven't got bored of trying, which is which is a real winner. I guess similarly to what I was asking Tim. I mean, how often are you still facing that battle, which is, do you know what? I just want a cheap bit of carpet, thanks. How are you? What's that balance feeling like in the marketplace at the moment?
It's an internal frustration, and I would love to join a webinar when I can kind of say, do you remember those days when cheap, new and replaceable was a thing? It still remains a significant challenge, especially as we come out of COVID and an economy that was a little bit shaky even going into 2020. If we're going to really talk about a green recovery, we're asking people to take more responsible choices at a time when the budget's more constrained. And I think everyone in the industry is feeling that, but it's important that we do find a way to persuade them to make those right choices. I think for us, it's getting easier. The more discussions we have around people's waste targets with our customers, the more discussions around, if a company's made a net zero goal, we can link circularity to it, and so you can make an easy saving. And then the one thing I think we have to get better as manufacturers at doing is highlighting kind of value. So in terms of a reuse product, the fact that, for some projects, what if you did choose to specify a flooring product for use in 1 or 2 projects? For those bits that are going to be not used so much, already have that in mind, and we'll work with our designers to make that work. So you only have to replace a smaller number of tiles. That's a saving for you, and you're getting better value out of the products you bought. So I think there's some good value discussions for us to have with our customers, because we also just need to start putting a proper cost on waste and relating to its carbon impact. But on the more positive side, we need a better positive value on the reuse of interiors materials.
No, it's a big space, isn't it? And I think that was a fairly decent articulation of sort of the challenges. If I could ask all the speakers to turn themselves on so we can see everyone. We've got a few minutes to cram in a couple of questions before we have to do the wrap up. But firstly, thank you for everyone for making a contribution. It was really quite fascinating, and hopefully is giving everyone who's listening, all 107 of them, a bit of hope that things are moving forward. But I'd like to ask a question, and I'll pick on a few of you here. So we're sort of facing a world where, as manufacturers and suppliers of stuff, the pressure is on over the course of time to improve, let's call it, the second-hand content in the broadest sense. We're living in a world where everything you've previously sold is now owned by somebody else. So how do we think that future should look? So this is a sort of a real mashup of the need for quality incoming materials to drive up circularity of newly issued products, at the same time as trying to wrestle with the fact that someone's got a building or a piece of infrastructure that they spend a load of money on that's sitting on their books, that if we move to a leasing model, all of a sudden doesn't belong to them anymore, it belongs to you. So what's your big forward vision in terms of product responsibility and how, the mechanisms of how that should work? And I'm going to start with Barry. Mute, Barry.
Thanks, Miles. I think one of the visions within Tata Steel is, it doesn't sound very strategic, does it? You're proposing strategies to sell less steel in the future. It's not very strategic at all. But I guess I've spent my whole career, and many of my colleagues around me are spending their career trying to sell less steel. And that's about coming up with solutions like higher strength steel for reduced design weight for a given design. So we actually spend a lot of our time looking for solutions that will drive the sale of less steel, whether that's more efficient designs, whether that's in terms of material design or actual product design. So we spend a lot of time doing that at the moment. In terms of kind of the reuse vision, what the manufacturers need to do is not just look at, and the vision for Tata Steel is to not just look at the sale of the product, but look at how we generate revenue through the life of the product. So whether that's our insulated facade panels and looking at sensors going in those panels and the data that comes from those panels. Of course, that's important data in terms of circular economic use or the reuse of those panels, but we could generate, in theory, revenue from selling that data to a building services company if those panels come with those sensors already fitted, factory fitted. So that's kind of the vision we are looking at. We spend a lot of time trying to come up with more efficient designs and more efficient materials all the time. And this is just an extension of that.
No, and again, that's not insignificant, is it? And I think one of the really interesting context pieces that we face at the moment is because I think there's been a really big shift in the finance community looking to put its money into businesses that are really thinking about this stuff. Not 5-10 years ago, you said out loud, "Hi, I work for Tata Steel, and my job is to sell less stuff." That would be a terrifying moment for all shareholders and investors. And of course, now it's moving to the complete reverse. So that's really that's really interesting. Purva, what did you out of the research that you did? What sort of feeling did you get from the marketplace around the whole sort of long-term ownership of materials? You know, what was there any insight into that that's worth knowing?
I think the aspiration, as we heard from our manufacturers here today, is similar. I mean, market is moving towards reuse, but one of the major barriers, or I would say because of the lack of scalability, because that reuse market is such small in comparison to what we do right now is recycling or recovery for that matter. So that scalability, and to scale that market and to make it more economically effective in that sense, there is, as I mentioned, there is that tension between, it can certainly lead to cost benefit, but at the moment that high cost is the barrier. So how to mitigate that is something that we all need to think about.
Sure, and absolutely, and it's a reoccurring theme, isn't it? So how do we wean ourselves off of cheap and linear to more wholesome and circular, I think is sort of the question of the day. So as we're in sort of the evening of our hour, I'm going to ask everyone to respond to this. And if you could do so in sort of 20 seconds or less, then I won't get in trouble with Lucy. So I'll start with you, Purva, seeing as you were just speaking. But if you could fire a golden bullet to fix the situation, to move to higher levels of circularity, what would that golden bullet be? Purva?
That golden bullet, from my perspective, will be we all need to collaborate. I mean, there is something we as industry, starting from manufacturing through to disposal, everyone has got their own capacities, skills, capabilities. Why not we collaborate and think about in a holistic way, think about and lobby the government to make the regulations based on our collaboration. One of the best examples recently is the collaboration.
You can't do examples because you take
all right.
Too much information. We'll stick the collaboration golden bullet and put it in the bag. Right, Tim, what's your golden bullet?
I think it ties a little bit into the collaboration. I think it's the education.
Okay.
Making people realise what's possible and what they should be doing. I'll leave it at that because you've got 20 seconds.
Brilliant.
Yeah,
good man.
Important part.
Awesomely succinct. John, what's your golden bullet?
From my side, we see lots of pockets of innovation, but I need that regulation to come in the longer term that makes things happen at scale and across the board, because we can have 100 short good ideas, but we need a wholesale change across our industry.
Thank you, sir. And last but not least, Mr. Rust.
I think we all sit in our expertise silos, whether we're steelmaking expertise, engineering expertise, or architects expertise. I think we need to break out a little bit more and start sharing and pooling that expertise to start driving more solutions.
Thank you very much. So just before I hand back to Lucy, because I think there's an exit poll, if that's the right phrase. Thanks again for everyone for taking part. I think we sort of left that on the note of collaboration, getting out of our silos, driving up knowledge and education, possibly, but more than likely having to scoop up the back end with some form of regulation. But let's hope that there's sufficient motivation to drive things forward. So by the time we get there, we've made the world a slightly better place.
I just want to say thank you to all of our speakers today for a really engaging discussion, and Miles, of course, to you for chairing excellently and finishing up just before the hour. So yes, thank you everyone in the audience as well for your great questions, and we will follow up with a recording and slides with you afterwards. Have a good afternoon.